14. Blessed art thou, O Father in heaven, that thou hast chosen our portion that we may serve thee, and that thou hast not made us, as the peoples of the world, into idolaters, which bow down and worship the work of their hands. Have compassion, Father in heaven, on thy creatures, and open their eyes, so that all of them may see that thou alone art King of all the worlds, and that there is none beside thee. Joshua ben Kalman received us in his house, and when he learned that they that were come under his roof were a rabbi and his disciples, he held it a great honor, and he took it upon himself to serve our rabbi. Now we did not impart to him who this man was that had crossed his threshold, for our rabbi had bidden us strictly to tell no man his name or of his deeds, for he would not be known in this strange place. And even though he that had taken us under his roof perceived from the manner of our acts that we were of the sect of the Pharisees, nevertheless we forgot all divisions among ourselves, and all felt that we were but children of the one living God. Now, when the man had brought water in earthen ewers, and he and his children had helped us to wash our hands and feet, then we sat down about the table. And his wife had hastened into the kitchen and had prepared food for us, for we were a-hungered from the long way, and no food had come into our mouths that day. And the woman put upon the table bread, likewise butter and cheese, all prepared according to the ritual of the Jews. And there were also green things, but there was no meat, for that they dwelt among the Gentiles, which eat of the living blood of the beast, and they could not demean themselves to eat thereof. And only when they went up on the Passover pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem did they eat meat, to wit, of the Passover sacrifice. And the man told us of the manner of living of the Jewish congregation in the midst of the Gentiles, where the witnesses of the living God had made a nest for themselves. And he said, Praised be he, we dwell here in peace, and each one helpeth and strengtheneth the hand of the other. There be among us such as are learned in the writ, and we have here our little sacred synagogue, and we assemble on the Sabbath, and some of us are called up to the reading of the Torah. And the elders and the prayer leader read forth for us every Sabbath the portion of that week, once in the holy tongue, and twice in the version, and the preacher preacheth. And those that have been on pilgrimage to Jerusalem then deliver the greetings of God's house. And he that heard there a tradition unknown to us, or a new word from a rabbi, telleth of it. And oft there is a good deed to be done, such as the ransoming of a slave, for they that deal in human souls bring at times a Jew in the midst of their merchandise, he having been captured upon the sea, or upon dry land, and sold into slavery. And it is so, that whenever a new ship cometh into harbour, so the chief of our synagogue, to whom this hath been entrusted, goeth to the harbour, and searcheth and inquireth, lest there be, God forbid, a Jew among the slaves. And we have our treasury therefore, and we redeem him. And in past years, in the great unrest under Archelaus, many Jewish slaves were brought from Galilee, the which Varus, the wicked one, had sold to the sons of Tyre, and God sent punishment upon him, therefore, later. In those days of the war with Varus, our congregation did great things with the help of the temple and the funds sent us by the high priest, and we ransomed many slaves, and some returned home when the troublous times had become quiet. But many of them remained here and added to the number of our congregation. Likewise, we have here many that have dwelt long years in the land. They came here of old, in the days of the Hasmoneans. And we comport ourselves here among the Gentiles as though we dwelt in the holy congregation of Israel. We make our pilgrimages to Jerusalem, on each festival another group, and we bring back strength and firmness for our faith. Likewise, we renew our faith every Sabbath. And when it chanceth that a learned man passeth this way, and he preacheth of the Torah on the Sabbath day, so the whole assembly gathereth to hear the word of God. And if it pleaseth your rabbi to sojourn with us until the Sabbath, and to preach to us, then I will go straightway and apprise the elders. And the man would have gone straightway to bring word to the elders of the synagogue, that they come to honor the rabbi in his house. For he said that it was not fitting that he alone should have this honor. And when they would learn on the next day that a rabbi and his disciples had been in the city, and they had not been bidden to the feast, they would have hard thoughts against him. But our rabbi forbade this thing strictly, for that he would remain unknown in the city. And as we sat as brothers together, and thanked God that he had been gracious unto us, and brought us under a Jewish roof, that we might not pass the night in the street among the Gentiles, there was heard on a sudden the approaching of a noise like the waves of the sea, a whistling and a playing of flutes, and a beating of drums, and a tumult of men, so that the voices filled the night and mounted to heaven. And when we were filled with wonder thereat, then the master of the house declared it unto us, that these were preparations, and on the morrow the inhabitants of the city would offer a sacrifice, the firstborn son of a family of honor, to their idol Moloch. For whensoever there cometh a disaster on the city, so they offer their God the sacrifice of a human being. And there had come evil tidings to the city, that 10 of their ships, laden with merchandise, had been overtaken by storm on the sea by Tarshish, and swallowed by the waves. And the tumult in the streets signified the preparations for the dissolute sacrifice. And 8 days the city delivereth itself unto abominations. For they unman themselves openly and in public, and they throw the severed parts into houses, and they in the house throw out in return the garments of women, wherein they deck themselves, and take part in the whoredoms which are practiced in the temple of Ashtaroth. And when we heard this, the terror of the night fell upon us, and we thought to flee from the city, and get us gone as quickly as might be from this unclean land. And I looked upon my rabbi, and knew him not, for his countenance was as black as earth, and his eyes were buried deep and clouded, and it was as if the pain of the world weighed upon his shoulders, and bore them down. But his lips were sealed, and he spoke not. And later in the night I heard the praying of our rabbi, and though it was the 5th night that sleep had not come to his eyelids, and though we had lain in the open upon the hills, and were now under a roof, and were weary, natheless sleep came not to him, and he stood among his disciples that were stretched out upon the terrace of the house, which the master thereof had given us for lodgment. And I beheld the hands which he stretched up to heaven, and I heard the voice which went forth from him, a groaning and suffering, but words I heard not, and it was as if his heart had been extinguished. And on the morrow we thought again to leave the city with hasty footsteps, and to return to the land of Israel, which we had lost like sheep, which hear no more the flute of the shepherd. But our rabbi said unto us that he would remain until he had seen all the abomination which was done in the city by its inhabitants before their idols. And he entreated the master of the house to lead him that day to the place of the idols. And we were filled with wonder thereat, but we followed him. And when we came into the city, lo, the city was like unto a drunken harlot. And the streets were filled with folk in holiday attire, and they were clad in garments and shawls and sheets of the colors of lilies, and violet striped and streaked with blue and red. And as their garments were colored, even so were their faces, and their lips were crimson, as if they had but just drunk of the blood of slaughtered beasts. And there were such of their menfolk as were garbed in the attire of women, and as they walked, they imitated the manner of women. And they wore nose rings and earrings and chains that carried perfume vials upon their bosoms, which they bared in the manner of women. And there were such women as wore the attire of men, and they had fastened to their faces braided beards, and they had upon their heads the wigs of men. And these were the holy and sanctified ones, the priests and the priestesses of their idol Ashtaroth. And they went in processions and carried the teraphim of their idols. Likewise they carried trees, which they cut from their gardens. And musicians went before them and played upon instruments. And there was a dancing of naked men and women. And there followed other processions of their great idol Bel, and in this procession they wore high headgears and coloured girdles upon white raiment, and the flute players blew before them, and the sistrum players beat upon their sistra, and a great host followed after the priests.